Imagine, if you will, a biting, freezing December night. You are completely isolated, snowed into this dense, unforgiving forest. There's no electricity and obviously no telephones.
Right, the nearest help is miles and miles away through these treacherous, snow-choked mountain passes. You are entirely cut off.
Exactly. And your shelter. It's this fragile structure with walls made of little more than woven straw, thatch, and some really thin logs.
The wind is basically howling right through the gaps, bringing the scent of ice and pine right into your living space.
Yeah, so you're sitting there shivering in the dim light of a hearth, just trying to keep your family warm and then out in the dark. Imagine a 340-kilogram apex predator silently stepping out of the tree line.
Oh, it's terrifying.
And this massive animal decides that your fragile, paper-thin shelter is its new hunting ground.
I mean, it is the absolute definition of a biological nightmare. You are stripped entirely of all modern defenses. You're placed face to face with this overwhelming force of nature, an animal that has spent millions of years evolving to hunt, kill, and survive in that exact freezing environment.
Well, in 1915, that nightmare actually became a reality, and it resulted in what remains the worst, most devastating animal attack in all of Japanese history.
Yeah, the Sankabetsu brown bear incident.
Exactly. And I want to be clear right up front. This isn't just some campfire ghost story designed to give you a cheap scare. It is a highly documented historical event that left a trail of unimaginable carnage.
It really did, and the historical and biological implications of this event are just massive.
Which is why today's deep dive is taking us right into the heart of that frozen terror.
You know, the reflexive human response is to view this as a monster story, like a tale of a bloodthirsty demon bear.
Sure, it sounds like a horror movie.
But fundamentally, when you actually look at the evidence, the biology, and the historical context, this was a tragic, inevitable collision.
It was the violent intersection of aggressive human expansion into untouched wilderness and the unforgiving imperatives of nature.
Perfectly said.
So we are going to guide you through this entire harrowing timeline. We'll look at the harsh, almost unbelievable realities of pioneer life that inadvertently set the stage for this disaster.
And we'll examine the biological anomalies of this specific bear, too, down to its metabolism and psychology to understand why it acted with such tactical brutality.
We'll also explore the lasting social impact on the region. And finally, for those of you feeling incredibly brave, we are going to equip you with the practical and somewhat chilling realities of visiting the actual reconstructed site today.
Yeah, it's a journey that really forces us to deeply question our perceived dominance over the natural world.
And whether the lines we draw between civilization and wilderness are really as sturdy as we like to believe.
They rarely are.
So let's start by looking at who these people were and why they were living in such vulnerable conditions. It's November 1915. We are in Hokkaido, Japan's northernmost main island.
Right, specifically in Tommai village, in this incredibly remote inland settlement called Rokusenzawa, which is known today as Senkai.
So what was driving people into this frozen wilderness in the first place?
Well, to understand the vulnerability of these settlers, you really have to understand the geopolitical and social engine of Taisho-era Japan.
Okay, set the scene for us.
The government was aggressively pushing to settle Hokkaido. For centuries, it had been largely the domain of the indigenous Ainu people,
Right.
but Tokyo increasingly viewed it as their frontier, kind of like their Wild West. They needed resources, agricultural expansion, and they needed to establish a firm population presence.
Basically to secure the territory against perceived threats from the north.
Exactly. So they were essentially funneling people who maybe didn't have a lot of options back on the mainland into these incredibly harsh, untamed regions.
So they were sending farmers, laborers, and impoverished families deep into the rugged interior, into primeval forests that have been completely untouched by mass human settlement for millennia.
Yeah, and Rokusenzawa was the absolute bleeding edge of this expansion. We are talking about a tiny, isolated community of just 15 pioneer households clinging to the side of a mountain.
And reading the descriptions of their living conditions in our sources is staggering. I mean, the word household conjures an image of a cabin or a cottage.
Oh, they were nothing like that.
Not at all. These pioneers lived in what were called keitakugoya, or pioneer huts. They had packed dirt floors, The walls were constructed of loosely assembled, unhewn logs.
And they were covered with nothing more than thatch and woven straw mats, which were called mushiro.
Right, they were rudimentary, temporary shelters designed merely to block the wind. They offered zero structural integrity against any kind of physical force.
Literally zero. If you leaned heavily against the wall of a kaitakugoya, you could easily push right through it.
It's like pitching a paper tent in the direct path of a wrecking ball. It's a purely psychological barrier.
A psychological barrier is a great way to put it.
You pull the straw mat closed at night, you can't see the dark forest outside, so your brain tricks you into feeling safe. But physically, you have absolutely zero protection.
And the reason these specific pioneers were in this highly dangerous location brings us to the ecological clash at the heart of this tragedy.
Right, why were humans and bears suddenly occupying the exact same space?
It all comes down to industry, specifically the herring fishery operating on the coast.
I found this part of the sources so fascinating because it traces a direct line of cause and effect. The coastal towns were pulling in massive catches of herring.
But they weren't just eating it.
No, they were producing something called nishinkasu, or herring meal, which was highly prized as a high-grade fertilizer for crops down in southern Japan.
And to process millions of raw herring into usable fertilizer meal, you have to boil them in these massive iron cauldrons.
Which requires a ridiculous amount of firewood.
An astronomical amount. So these inland pioneers in places like Rokusenzawa were essentially contracted out to conduct large-scale deforestation.
They were cutting down the ancient forests to supply the coastal kilns. This wasn't just a few farmers clearing a patch of land for turnips.
No, this was an industrial-scale harvesting of the local ecosystem.
Right.
They were stripping the landscape bare.
Which means the wildlife living in that forest is suddenly facing an apocalyptic event.
For the local Ezo brown bear population, this was utter devastation. The primeval forest was their entire world.
Deforestation meant a sudden, catastrophic loss of crucial food resources, like acorns, berries, small game.
But most importantly, it meant the destruction of their traditional wintering grounds.
Right.
This is the exact area where these bears would normally dig their dens into the roots of large trees to hibernate. The pioneers were literally tearing the roof off the bears' homes just as the brutal Hokkaido winter was setting in.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the central figure of our deep dive. A specific bear that would eventually come to be known by the locals as Kisaga.
Yeah, kisegake. That translates roughly to a diagonal slash.
Because the locals who caught glimpses of it noted a distinctive scar, or maybe a white patch of fur, that crossed from its shoulder across its massive chest.
It resembled the traditional stole worn diagonally by Buddhist monks, hence the name.
The physical descriptions of this animal in the historical records are just mind-boggling. Ezo brown bears are already huge, but Kisagake was an absolute anomaly.
We are talking about a male bear measuring 2.7 meters. That is nearly 9 feet from heel to snout.
And it weighed up to 380 kilograms, over 830 pounds.
If you try to visualize that, it's roughly the weight of a concert grand piano.
Wow.
But this piano has the agility of an elite athlete. It can run at speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour.
And it's armed with non-retractable claws of the size of human fingers, designed for ripping roots out of the frozen earth.
Not to mention a bite force capable of crushing a bowling ball. It was an exceptionally massive, dominant specimen.
So we have this massive dominant predator. Its habitat is shrinking rapidly, the temperature is dropping fast, and winter is closing in.
And in early November, the prelude to the nightmare begins.
The bear starts encroaching on the human territory of Rokusenzawa. It doesn't attack people right away, though.
No, it starts by targeting the Akita household, specifically going after harvested corn that was hung under the eaves of the roof to dry.
What's fascinating here is the behavioral conditioning taking place.
Exactly. The bear is testing the boundaries of its changing environment. It smells a high-calorie food source, the corn, and tracks it to a human habitation.
It takes the corn, and crucially, it faces no immediate negative consequence.
Right. The human settlement has just been cataloged in the bear's brain as a viable, easy foraging ground.
The villagers obviously realize they have a problem on their hands. So on November 30th, they try to establish a boundary, and they make a catastrophic mistake.
A truly fatal error.
2 local hunters decide to lay in wait for the bear near the settlement. They ambush it, they fire their weapons, but they don't land a fatal shot.
They only manage to wound it.
The bear flees deep into the mountains, leaving this thick trail of blood in the snow. But a sudden blizzard forces the hunters to abandon the chase.
From a wildlife management perspective, wounding an apex predator and letting it escape is the worst possible outcome.
Because now you have an angry bear. I mean, it seems like missing completely would have been better.
Oh, missing completely would have been infinitely better.
Really?
Yeah, if a hunter misses, the loud crack of the rifle startles the bear. It associates humans with loud, scary noises and maintains its natural instinct to avoid them.
Ah, that makes sense.
But by shooting the animal, causing immense physical trauma, and failing to eliminate it, the hunters drastically altered the bear's psychological profile.
They basically declared war, but failed to finish the fight.
They subjected it to immense pain and physiological stress, which spikes adrenaline and aggression. But more importantly, they taught the bear a very specific, lethal lesson.
That humans are hostile, humans will cause pain, but ultimately, human weapons are ineffective.
Exactly. So the natural caution, that instinct to run away from the weird two-legged creatures, is completely stripped away.
It's replaced by a learned understanding that humans are a threat that must be actively confronted and neutralized.
It becomes a potent mix of desperation, pain-induced rage, and contempt.
And the wounded Kisagaki doesn't just flee into the deep mountains to die of its injuries. It survives.
And when it returns to Rokusenzawa, it comes back with a lethal new understanding of its environment.
Which brings us to the morning of December 9th, the first strike.
The environmental conditions that morning were pretty typical for a Hokkaido winter. Deep snowdrifts, freezing temperatures, heavy overcast skies.
And the pioneer settlement was already in a highly vulnerable state. Most of the men from the village were out working together.
They had gone to the river to cut wood and construct an ice bridge, which was this crucial piece of winter infrastructure so they could transport supplies.
Right, which meant the 15 fragile households were largely occupied only by women, children, and the elderly.
Leaving the defensive capability of the entire settlement at near zero.
So we focus on the Oda household. Inside are 34-year-old Mayu and a 6-year-old boy named Mikio, whom she was looking after while his parents worked.
And sometime mid-morning, the bear arrives.
It doesn't sneak around looking for corn this time. It breaches the fragile window of the hut.
Keep in mind the construction of these huts we talked about. A window wasn't glass and wood. It was likely just a square gap in the logs covered by a thin straw mat.
And to a 380-kilogram bear, a straw mat offers less physical resistance than a wet paper bag.
The bear bursts into the cramped living space. It instantly attacks and kills young Mikio with a blow to the head.
Then it turns on Mayu. The horrific reality recorded in the sources is that it didn't kill her immediately.
No, it dragged her, alive and struggling, out of the house, through the broken window, and into the freezing forest.
The sheer biomechanical strength required to execute that maneuver is terrifying.
To grab a struggling adult human in its jaws and drag them through deep snow and dense mountain brush, it's staggering.
When the men return from the river at noon, they walk into the Ota house and find a scene of absolute carnage.
The hearth fire is scattered, blood is everywhere.
A desperate search party is quickly organized. The men follow the wide, bloody drag marks into the forest. About 150 meters into the tree line, they spot the bear.
They fire their rifles, but again, the shots don't connect fatally, and the bear retreats deeper into the woods.
But then, the search party looks down. Hidden under the snow and broken branches, they find Mayu's remains. They had been partially consumed.
This is a profoundly chilling detail in the historical record, and it's absolutely essential for understanding the biological nightmare that was unfolding.
Yeah, the bear didn't just drop the body and run. Finding the remains buried under the snow and brush is indicative of a specific biological mechanism known as cassing behavior.
Exactly.
When I first read that they found her buried in the snow, my immediate thought was that the bear was trying to hide the evidence from the men tracking it, like a criminal hiding a body.
It's a natural assumption, but reading the biology notes, it's far more sinister than that.
It's treating the victim like a pantry.
Right. Your intuition about the sinister nature of it is completely correct. Bears are opportunistic omnivores. They graze, they forage.
Right.
But when they secure a massive, high-value protein source, like a deer, a boar, or, in this tragic case, a human, their instinct is to fiercely protect that caloric investment.
They will bury a carcass under snow, dirt, or brush to hide it from scavengers like crows or foxes.
And to utilize the freezing temperatures to preserve the meat.
So it was literally putting her in cold storage.
Yes. By caching Mayu's remains, the bear was actively treating the human being as a long-term preserved food source.
Oh.
Furthermore, by burying it, the bear marks that specific geographic area as its exclusive territory. It was claiming absolute ownership over the prey and the land it sat on.
That is deeply unsettling.
Yep.
The villagers, horrified and grieving, recover the remains and bring them back to the Oda house.
And this decision, driven by human grief and cultural tradition, leads directly into the absolute horror of December 10th, the cursed wake.
It is a perfect tragic storm where absolute cultural necessity collides head-on with biological reality.
It really is.
The villagers gather at the Ota house that night to hold a wake for Mayu and Mikio. They believe that there is safety in numbers.
They have fires burning. They have all the adults gathered together in one room, mourning and praying.
But then the bear returns. It literally bursts right through the wall of the house, looking to reclaim what it perceives as its stolen prey.
We have to view this from the bear's perspective. To Kisagake, the humans are thieves.
They have entered its marked territory and stolen its hard-earned cash.
Its return to the Ota house isn't random wandering. It is a highly motivated, targeted retrieval mission. It wants its food back.
The people inside the Ota house absolutely panic. The bear knocks over the central hearth fire, plunging the room into chaotic, flickering shadows.
People are scrambling into the rafters, screaming, hiding behind anything they can find.
One of the men manages to fire a gun, or at least attempts to. But many of the guns misfire due to poor maintenance, or they aren't even loaded in the chaos.
Eventually, the sheer noise, the screaming, and the huge number of moving bodies caused the bear to flee back outside.
No one is killed at the wake, but this disruption triggers the next, most devastating phase of the tragedy.
Denied its primary objective, the bear is now highly agitated. Its adrenaline is surging, and it is still desperately, ravenously hungry.
It redirects its aggression toward the nearest available target.
It moves down the snowy path to a nearby household, the Myakage house.
Because the men were either at the wake or out patrolling the perimeter with lanterns, the Myakage house had been designated as a safe haven for the women and children of the settlement to sleep.
It was perceived as a safe place because it was crowded.
Right.
But practically speaking, a straw hut filled with sleeping children was utterly defenseless.
The bear, enraged and denied its meal at the Ota house, targets the Myakage house. And the sources detail the massacre that follows, and it is truly harrowing to read.
It's awful.
The bear bursts through the wall. The very first thing it does is knock over the large cooking pot hanging over the hearth, completely extinguishing the central fire.
Plunging the room into pitch-black darkness.
It's a tactical maneuver, whether instinctual or accidental.
By extinguishing the light source, the bear creates total sensory chaos and panic for the human occupants.
Meanwhile, the bear, equipped with excellent night vision, acute hearing, and a supreme sense of smell, is operating at peak sensory efficiency. It owns the dark.
And in that darkness, the bear attacks. It is an absolute slaughter.
The historical records recount the details with grim precision. A pregnant woman named Take is trapped in the corner of the dark room.
The records state she pleaded with the animal in the dark, screaming, "Don't tear my belly, bite my throat."
She was begging the bear to kill her quickly but spare her unborn child.
But the bear killed her, and the fetus did not survive.
It also killed 3 young children in that dark room and severely injured 3 others, tossing them around like rag dolls.
The brutality is incredibly difficult to process. It wasn't a quick, calculated kill for food like a lion taking down a gazelle.
No, it was a chaotic, sustained assault in a confined space against multiple targets.
I have to pause here because something is really bothering me about the sequence of events.
Sure, what is it?
Well, the villagers decided to hold a wake. They brought the bloody remains of a bear's victim back into a fragile, straw-walled house right in the middle of a forest where they knew a massive, wounded predator was roaming.
Right.
Was that just a fatal flaw in their risk management? Were they out of their minds?
I want to be very careful and deeply respectful of the trauma and the cultural norms of Taisho-era Japan here. Holding awake, mourning the dead, recovering the body for proper Buddhist rites, these are deeply ingrained, fundamental human needs.
Oh, absolutely. You cannot fault grieving families for wanting to honor their dead neighbors.
Exactly. However, if we evaluate the situation strictly from a wildlife management and survival perspective, yes, it was a catastrophic decision.
It's like ringing a dinner bell. You are literally baiting the trap.
You are taking a high-value food source that a dominant apex predator has already claimed and cached, and you are placing it inside a structure that offers no physical protection whatsoever.
You are essentially bringing the bear's prize back into the very center of the human population.
The tragic reality is that adhering to human cultural norms directly violated the biological rules of survival in that specific environment.
Nature doesn't care about our morning rituals.
It really doesn't. And to understand how an animal could act with such relentless, almost tactical aggression, extinguishing fires, tracking stolen prey, ignoring a mob of people to get what it wants, slaughtering a room full of people, we really have to pivot from the human tragedy to the animal biology.
What on earth was going on with Kisagake? This goes way beyond a typical bear encounter.
The key to understanding Keisaga's behavior lies in a specific biological phenomenon known in Japan as anamotazu.
The sources translate that roughly to a bear that failed to hibernate. But what does that actually mean for the animal?
It translates literally to without a hole or without a den. It's mid-December in Hokkaido. The landscape is frozen solid.
Normal Ezo brown bears are deep asleep in their dens, surviving the winter on the thick layers of brown adipose tissue fat they built up during the autumn foraging months.
But Kisagake was wide awake.
Why? How does a bear just forget or fail to hibernate? Is it a choice?
It's absolutely not a choice. It's a metabolic failure. There are a few reasons an anamotazu occurs.
Sometimes a bear is suffering from an illness or a severe injury, like the gunshot wound Kisagake sustained in November that causes physiological stress and prevents the body from entering the torpor state.
But more commonly, it is a failure to secure enough caloric intake during the fall, often due to the very deforestation the pioneers were conducting.
Wait, so if they don't eat enough, they literally can't sleep?
The biology of hibernation is fascinating and fragile. A bear's body is a massive furnace.
To enter hibernation, certain chemical triggers in the brain rely on a sufficient threshold of fat reserves.
If a bear doesn't have enough fat, its endocrine system physically will not allow it to hibernate.
Because if it went to sleep, its resting metabolism would burn through whatever tiny reserves it had left, and it would simply starve to death in its sleep.
Right. The body keeps the bear awake as a desperate survival mechanism.
So it's trapped in a waking nightmare. The snow is falling, the food is gone, and its body refuses to shut down.
An anamotazu is a bear pushed to the absolute psychological and physiological brink. It is freezing, it is starving, its metabolism is screaming for calories that no longer exist in the winter landscape.
This starvation biologically forces immense amounts of adrenaline and cortisol into the animal's system.
It turns a naturally cautious animal into a hyper-aggressive, risk-taking killing machine.
Furthermore, the historical sources indicate a chilling suspicion about Kisagake's past before he even arrived in Rokusenzawa.
Yeah, the records mention that after the bear was finally killed, locals from neighboring districts came to identify it, and it was suspected of having killed 3 women in other regions over the previous years.
Wait, really? 3 other people?
Yeah, exactly. If that suspicion is true, it is a monumental piece of the puzzle. It means the bear had already crossed the psychological Rubicon long before the incident.
It had already figured out that humans are slow, soft, and full of calories.
It had classified human beings not as an unknown entity or a threat to be avoided, but as a highly viable, easy food source.
When Kisagake arrived in Rokusenzawa, starving and unable to hibernate, he was already a seasoned man-eater.
He wasn't experimenting. He was returning to a proven food source.
That completely changes the dynamic. It wasn't a wild animal stumbling into a village out of curiosity. It was a predator entering a grocery store.
And the details of this incident completely shatter so many of the survival myths we hear about bear encounters today.
Let's debunk some of these folklore tactics using Senkabetsu as proof, because I feel like the movies have completely lied to us.
It is crucial to dispel these myths, because believing them in a real-world encounter can be fatal.
Myth number 1. Wild animals fear fire. I've seen it in 100 survival movies. You wave a torch, you build a big bonfire, and the beast cowers in the shadows, afraid of the flame.
But during the Senkabetsu incident, the villagers lit massive bonfires outside the huts. They had lanterns swinging. They had hearth fires burning indoors.
And the bear completely ignored the flames. When it breached the Miyake house, it didn't shy away from the glowing hearth fire.
It actively walked up to it and knocked over the iron pot to extinguish it.
While a sudden, unexpected burst of flame in its face might startle a naive animal, a starving, determined predator, especially one that has observed human fires from a distance for years, will quickly realize the fire itself is not an active, pursuing threat if it's stationary.
The fear of fire is entirely a human projection onto the animal kingdom. To the bear, a barn fire is just a warm landmark.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting and a little terrifying. Myth number 2, playing dead works.
Ah, the classic advice. You encounter a bear, you drop to the ground, cover your neck, and wait for it to lose interest and wander off.
This is a highly context-dependent tactic, and applying it incorrectly will absolutely get you killed.
In a predatory attack like the Sankabetsu incident, playing dead is entirely useless.
The sources note that during the absolute chaos of the massacre at the Miyake house, victims who were unconscious or immobile on the floor were ignored only because the bear was distracted by the people who were running away.
Right. The bear's instinct, much like a dog chasing a thrown ball or a cat chasing a laser pointer, is triggered by rapid movement. It chases fleeing prey.
If you run, you trigger the predatory sequence.
Now, if you startle a mother bear with cubs, she might attack defensively to neutralize the threat. In that specific scenario, playing dead when she makes contact might convince her the threat is neutralized and she might leave.
But Sankabetsu was not a defensive attack. This was predatory. Kisagake was hunting for calories.
If you play dead for a predator that actively wants to eat you, you are simply serving yourself on a platter.
So taking all this, in the caching, the targeted returns, the extinguishing of fires, the focus on moving prey, what does this tell us about bear cognition overall? They aren't just mindless eating machines.
It highlights that bears possess immense cognitive abilities and exceptional spatial memories. They are highly intelligent, adaptable problem solvers.
Once a bear learns that human settlements equate to food, whether that's corn hung under the eaves, garbage left outside, or tragically, human beings themselves, a deadly neural association is forged permanently in their brain.
They map that resource. They know exactly where it is and how to get it.
This cognitive reality forms the absolute backbone of modern wildlife management. A fed bear is a dead bear. You cannot allow them to make that initial caloric association with human habitats.
Following the massacre at the Miyake house, the local authorities finally realized they are dealing with an unprecedented threat.
The death toll is staggering. The village is paralyzed by terror.
This is no longer an issue for a few local hunters. The government escalates the situation into a full-scale military operation. We enter the phase of the 600-man siege.
The massive scale of the response reflects the sheer, unadulterated panic that was gripping the entire Hokkaido region as news of the massacre spread.
From December 11th to the 13th, the authorities organize an enormous manhunt. We are talking about 600 people mobilized.
This includes local police forces, young men from neighboring towns, and heavily armed army infantry from the Japanese 28th Regiment.
They bring in 60 firearms, which was a massive arsenal for civilians at the time, and packs of trained hunting dogs. They intend to blanket the mountains and execute the bear.
It sounds incredibly formidable on paper, a true show of human dominance.
But the logistics of actually coordinating 600 mostly untrained, terrified men in a freezing, trackless, snow-covered mountain range during a blizzard are an absolute nightmare.
And during this chaotic, stumbling manhunt, the police captain in charge makes a desperate tactical decision.
We talked about the fatal flaw of the wake earlier, how bringing the body back lured the bear.
Well, the police captain decides to actively lean into that grim biology. He implements what the sources call the bait strategy.
It remains one of the most chilling, morbid tactical decisions ever recorded in the history of human-wildlife conflict.
He orders his men to use the actual corpses of the victims, the women and children killed in the Miyake house, as bait to lure the bear back.
Stop right there. Are you telling me the police really ordered husbands and fathers to sit in a dark, freezing house with the mangled bodies of their own families, waiting for the monster that killed them to come back?
The ethical and psychological horror of that is beyond comprehension.
The psychological toll on those men is unimaginable. It is a decision born of absolute desperation.
However, if we remove human emotion and ethics from the equation, the captain was employing a strictly biologically sound strategy.
He was exploiting the bear's known cognitive obsession with its prey cache.
He knew, based on the attack at the wake, that Kesageki would eventually return to reclaim those bodies. He was trying to turn the bear's biology into a trap.
But it didn't work. The trap failed.
It failed spectacularly. And the reason it failed is perhaps the most terrifying part of the entire incident.
The bear was simply too smart.
The accounts say the bear actually returned to the Miyake house that night. It approached the perimeter. It circled the house in the freezing darkness.
But it sensed the ambush. Whether it smelled the pungent odor of gun oil and black powder, or the sheer amount of sweat and fear radiating from the men inside.
Or perhaps it just recognized that the auditory and visual environment of the house had changed. It slipped away. It completely outsmarted the trap.
It opted instead to go down into the village and systematically ransack 8 empty houses.
eating stored food, tearing up clothes, and destroying property, while the 600-man army waited uselessly by the corpses.
It perfectly illustrates the limitations of human blunt force against a highly adapted, hyper-intelligent predator operating in its own environment.
The army was loud, clumsy, and predictable. The bear was none of those things.
But a 600-man army crashing through the snow is the exact opposite of what you need to hunt a hyper-intelligent predator.
Which explains why the government's blunt force failed, and why it ultimately took a solitary hunter operating on the fringes to end the nightmare.
This brings us to December 14th and the arrival of a man named Heikichi Yamamoto.
Yamamoto is a fascinating historical figure. He represents the stark contrast between a clumsy, top-down institutional response and specialized, highly localized expertise.
Yamamoto was a 58-year-old veteran bear hunter. He didn't come with the army, he wasn't under police orders.
He arrived completely independently, having heard about the crisis.
If the 600-man posse was a loud, clumsy marching band tramping through the snow, spreading their scent and noise everywhere, Yamamoto operated like a ghost.
He had spent his entire life studying the Ezo brown bear. He understood the terrain, but more importantly, he understood the psychology of the animal he was hunting.
He didn't follow the mob of soldiers. He looked at the bear's behavior, the ransacking of the empty houses, and anticipated where the bear would go to rest and digest after a night of foraging in the village.
He deduces the bear's movements. He climbs the mountain, carefully approaching the area from downwind, ensuring the breeze wouldn't carry his scent and betray his position.
And he finds it. The massive bear, Kasagake, was resting near a large oak tree, conserving its energy.
Yamamoto managed to close the distance to just 20 meters. Let that sink in.
In dense mountain brush and crunching snow, sneaking up to within 20 meters of a hyper-vigilant, man-eating apex predator requires a level of extraordinary skill and nerve that borders on the superhuman.
He raises his rifle, he takes aim. His first shot hits the bear directly in the heart.
The 380-kilogram beast roars, a massive sound that echoes through the valley and actually rises up on his hind legs, preparing to attack him even with a bullet in his heart.
Unfazed, Yamamoto stands his ground, racks his rifle, and fires a second shot, striking the bear squarely in the head. And finally, the nightmare ends. The beast collapses and dies.
The precision and absolute calm under pressure are remarkable.
He succeeded where a heavily armed small army failed because he respected the animal's capabilities, understood its biology, and matched it with highly specialized skill.
But the story doesn't end the moment the bear hits the ground. The historical sources highlight this incredibly eerie, immediate aftermath.
As the villagers, soldiers, and hunters gather around this massive carcass, tying it to a sled to haul it down the mountain, the clear winter sky suddenly darkens.
A massive, violent blizzard slams into the region out of nowhere, burying the mountain in blinding snow and howling winds.
The timing of the weather event was uncanny, to say the least.
The villagers, deeply traumatized, physically exhausted, and culturally attuned to the spirits of nature, dubbed this sudden storm the Kumakaze, or the bear wind.
It's such a poetic and terrifying end to the six-day ordeal. It was as if the spirit of the ancient forest itself was raging at the death of its king.
It highlights how deeply intertwined the natural environment and human mythology become in the wake of profound trauma.
Scientifically, the storm was a sudden meteorological shift common in Hokkaido. But to the survivors who had just watched their families be devoured, it was the final, vengeful breath of the monster that had destroyed their lives.
It was the forest asserting its dominance one last time.
The bear was dead, yes, but the scars on the land and the people were permanent. How did this event shape the future of the region? The historical echoes of Sankabetsu are profound.
The most immediate and tangible impacts was the total failure of the human endeavor in that specific location.
Rokusenzawa didn't survive. The psychological trauma was simply too great. The government couldn't force them to stay.
You can't ask people to go back to sleeping in flimsy straw huts where they watch their children be dragged into the freezing dark.
The pioneer settlement was completely abandoned. The survivors packed up whatever meager possessions they had left and fled to the safety of the coastal towns, effectively surrendering the land back to the forest.
The frontier line was pushed back. Nature won.
It is a stark historical reminder that human conquest of nature is never guaranteed. Sometimes, nature pushes back with overwhelming force and the humans retreat.
But for some individuals, the surrender turned into a lifelong, obsessive crusade. The sources introduce a man named Haruyoshi Okawa.
During the incident, he was just a 7-year-old boy. He survived the attacks, but he witnessed the unimaginable terror.
And as he grew up, that trauma hardened into something else. He swore a blood oath. He vowed to kill 10 bears for every single victim that perished in Senkebetsu.
It is a profound psychological study of a man entirely consumed by his childhood trauma.
He dedicated his entire adult life to this vengeance. He became a legendary master hunter in Hokkaido.
Over his lifetime, tracking bears through the same mountains, he successfully hunted and killed 102 brown bears.
Achieving his grim quota, mathematically balancing the scales of his childhood nightmare.
Exactly. And once he reached that number of 102, he finally laid down his rifle.
He erected a solemn memorial for the victims in the village area. It was his way of finally putting the ghosts of 1915 to rest.
He reclaimed his agency and conquered his terror by becoming the very apex predator he feared as a child. It's a testament to the long shadow of the event.
There is another crucial figure we have to discuss regarding the preservation of this history, because without him, we wouldn't have this deep dive.
His name was Morita Kimura. He was a local forestry officer working in the Tomama area in the 1960s, nearly 50 years after the incident occurred.
His diligent work is the sole reason we can analyze this event with such biological precision today, rather than just recounting campfire myths.
Kimura realized that the actual facts of the event were fading from public memory. They were being replaced by sensationalized rumors, tall tales, and exaggerated folklore.
So, in the midst of Japan's post-war modernization, while the country was building bullet trains, Kimura took it upon himself to compile the definitive factual record of an obscure bear attack.
He spent years painstakingly tracking down the aging survivors of Rokusenzawa who were now in their 60s and 70s.
And we must acknowledge that his research was not an easy or welcome task.
Not at all. The sources note that he frequently had doors slammed in his face.
These survivors had buried this horrific trauma deep inside for half a century. They wanted absolutely nothing to do with a forestry officer digging up their worst nightmares and asking them to recount the sounds of the Miyake house.
But he persisted, gently and respectfully, over years of interviews, cross-referencing their accounts with police records, until he had the true, unvarnished story.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, without Kimura's absolute dedication to the truth, the invaluable biological data regarding bear caching behavior, predatory night attacks, and the specific dangers of the Anamotazu would have been lost entirely.
We would just have a myth about a demon, rather than a factual account of a predictable, albeit extreme, ecological disaster.
So from the historical trauma of 1915 and the preservation efforts of the 1960s, our deep dive shifts to the physical space today. What is it like to actually travel to Hokkaido and stand where the massacre happened?
Because you can go there.
The transition from reading the grim historical reality to experiencing the modern tourist infrastructure of the area is jarring, to say the least.
To get to the Senkebetsu Brown Bear Incident Restored Ground, you drive south from a town called Kodanbetsu on Route 1049.
And the local municipality has given this route a nickname, the Bear Road.
Which sounds appropriately ominous, but the reality of the road is quite different.
It is entirely bizarre. You are driving toward the site of the most horrific, bloody animal massacre in Japanese history, and the road features incredibly cute cartoonish bear mascots and brightly painted signs.
You have these big, smiling, friendly bears waving at you from the side of the road, pointing the way to the site of a slaughter.
It creates a profound cognitive dissonance for anyone who knows the actual history.
I really struggled with this when reviewing the sources. Does this cute branding undermine the horrific history? Does it disrespect the victims who died in such terror?
It's a very natural reaction to feel that it's disrespectful. But if we dig a little deeper into the sociology of it, it reflects a uniquely human coping mechanism.
How does a small, isolated town live with a legacy of such profound, dark tragedy? You can't market pure terror to casual tourists.
By adopting the Yuruchara, the cute mascot culture prevalent in Japan, the town is attempting to reclaim its identity.
They are trying to domesticate the memory, to shrink the monster down to a manageable cartoonish size that they can control.
It is a psychological defense mechanism writ large across the municipal infrastructure.
That makes sense. It's a way of whistling past the graveyard, putting a smiling mask over a deep scar.
But once you reach the end of the Bear Road, that cartoon facade completely vanishes.
The restored site itself does not play games. The atmosphere shifts dramatically.
It is located at the very end of a long, unpaved gravel road. You are deep in an unpopulated, dimly lit primeval forest.
The air feels heavy, the trees press in on you.
There, in a small clearing, they have built a life-size replica of a pioneer hut, showing exactly how flimsy it was.
And crashing through the fragile straw wall of that hut is a terrifyingly large, roaring bear statue, painted black with the signature white slash across its chest.
It is a stark, visceral reminder of the physical reality of the attack. It strips away the distance of time and puts you right back in 1915.
And here is where we need to issue a crucial, non-negotiable warning for any of you listening who might be planning to visit this site in Hokkaido.
This is not a sanitized theme park. There are no turnstiles or security guards. This is active bear country.
Let me provide a very practical safety briefing based on the source material and current Hokkaido wildlife advisories. Modern Ezo brown bears still heavily populate this exact valley today.
The direct descendants of Kesagak's population are walking the same paths.
Precisely. When you visit the restored ground, you are stepping into their living room.
Do not, under any circumstances, visit at dawn or dusk, as these are peak foraging activity hours for bears.
You must bring bear bells, a loud radio, or actively talk loudly to make constant noise so you don't accidentally startle an animal in the brush.
Furthermore, the environment itself is hostile. The area is swampy, heavily shaded, and prone to aggressive swarms of large wasps and horseflies during the warmer months.
And crucially, there is virtually no cell service. If you encounter an emergency, if your car breaks down, or if you see a bear, you are entirely on your own.
It is raw, unforgiving wilderness. The sources note that reviews from travelers who make the trek consistently mention an overwhelming sense of dread.
People say they arrive, take one look at the statue, feel the oppressive, silent weight of the forest pressing in on them, and get an overwhelming urge to get right back in their cars and leave after only a few minutes.
The land itself seems to hold the memory of the trauma. The profound isolation that doomed the pioneers in 1915 is still palpable there today. It is a place that does not want you to linger.
Let's bring this all together. We have taken an incredible journey today.
We started in the desperate, freezing pioneer days of Taisho-era Hokkaido, exploring the fragile lives of the settlers who were pushed to the edge of the world.
We witnessed the biological terror of Kesogak, an animal pushed to the brink of starvation by human expansion and a metabolic failure to hibernate.
We watched a clumsy 600-man army fail against a superior predator, and a solitary skilled hunter finally end the nightmare.
We saw how a survivor dedicated his life to vengeance, how a forester dedicated his life to the truth, and we've traveled down a bizarrely cute road to stand in an eerie, preserved forest site that warns us of the past.
It is a comprehensive, multi-layered case study in the devastating consequences of human-wildlife conflict. It shows us what happens when we recklessly alter an ecosystem without understanding the forces we are unleashing.
You know, as I was reading the warnings about visiting the physical site today and how active the bears still are, I couldn't help but think about the news headlines we see constantly right now.
We look at 1915 as this distant pioneer problem, a historical anomaly. But today, we frequently see stories about urban bears, wandering into modern cities, into suburbs, rummaging through garbage cans, breaking into garages.
It is happening globally. It is driven by climate change, altering their natural food sources in the deep woods, and human habitats continuing to sprawl outward, chewing up the green spaces.
It makes you wonder, as our modern footprint continues to expand and overlap with the wild, are we treating these encounters with the profound respect and caution they demand?
Or are we just putting up cute bear signs, assuming our concrete and glass will protect us?
Have we forgotten the bloody, terrifying lessons written in the snow of Sankabetsu over a century ago? Are we pitching new paper tents, assuming the wrecking ball will just swing around us?
That is the ultimate question this history asks us. Nature is patient, but it is not endlessly forgiving.
A truly chilling thought to leave on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, when you step past the edge of the pavement, whether it's into a deep forest or just your own backyard bordering the woods, always respect the boundary between human civilization and the wild. Because the wild remembers.